I hope everybody doesn't mind, but I will be having a drink in honor of our dear friend Steve.
Pour one out.
And his writing process of just getting absolutely hammered on a couch and churning out some of the greatest masterpieces of the 20th century? Yeah, 20th century. Yeah. And then a couple in the 21st century.
I think whatever's coming is going to be so bizarre and fascinating.
Yeah, how much of that do you think we will get to see? That's kind of one of the first things I thought of when I heard that he had died was like, oh no, did he finish that Buñuel musical? Because
I think there's definitely something that exists from beginning to end.
Okay, all right.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast to make a musical out of 3 Luis Buñuel movies. I am the worst of all possible Bryans.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. That's a deep cut, Brian, and these are just going to keep getting deeper, aren't they?
What third one are we including? They're trying to find a place to have dinner, and then they find a place to have dinner, and then they can't escape. So the third one would be like the restaurant is on fire.
Do you know how many movies Buñuel made about dinner parties? And speaking of dinner parties, joining us for this dinner party, before we get too deep into our bits, is Graham Techler.
Hi, everyone.
He writes for The New Yorker, McSweeney's, formerly of Paste. He's on Tuning Out the News and has also been on Our Cartoon President. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to talk Sondheim. I was absolutely thrilled to get this DM, so much appreciated.
I was thrilled to DM you.
Oh, good.
That's how exciting my days are.
Brian is just like sitting behind his computer and being like, it's time to go to DM.
So, beloved composer, bard of our age, Stephen Sondheim has passed away, which means that, yes, this is another emergency podcast. It's a big emergency. 4 black dragons spitting fire.
You know, what's funny about that, aside from everything, is that I was sitting on my computer today, and we share a Creative Cloud, and I saw
nothing, depending on how you
the
look
title,
at it.
Siren. And I'm like, what the fuck is Brian doing? And little did I know, it was inserting Tim Allen where he does not belong. How dare you?
I think that there's still time to get a production of Sweeney Todd starring Tim Allen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As Sweeney?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
No, as Tobias.
Demons will harm you nowadays.
We're going to get the whole cast of Wild Hogs together to fill in.
For just keep Michael Cerveris as Sweeney and then replace sort of like a Muppet situation. You get one.
Oh, I like this.
Travolta Pirelli?
Yes. For sure.
William H. Macy is Joanna.
Oh, God.
But you can see it, can't you?
I mean, I can.
Yeah.
But at what cost? So today we're talking Sondheim, and I think it'd probably be a really good place to start of how we were all introduced to his work. When did we first become aware sort of him as a monolithic like individual, or like what was our gateway musical, I guess, into Sondheim?
I have to think back to exactly which one was first. It was probably either Into the Woods or Sweeney. Into the Woods, because that's the one that, still obviously I most likely saw first as a children's theater or high school theater thing. And then I was like 12 or 13 when the Tim Burton Sweeney Todd movie came out. And somewhat embarrassingly enough, that recording is probably the first version of Sweeney that I became very acquainted with. And then after you listen to the movie
Don't be
soundtrack,
embarrassed with that.
The orchestrations are lush in that movie. They're very lush.
Flawed flick, but interesting for sure. And then I think from there, that's when I kind of understood him as like, oh, well, this is like a theatrical auteur who's like, I need to know everything at some point. So it's been like a slow release fandom where like every couple of years I'll add more of the works to my understanding of him. But I think I remember when I was like in the 6th or 7th grade, going to the library and finding the recording of The Frogs, which was like definitely a minor work for sure. But being like, oh, well, this is Stephen Sondheim. I have to get this out from the library and listen to it. And I think when you reach the point where you're like have any internal obligation to have to listen to the frogs, then you're in, then you're stuck.
in way too deep. Yeah.
You're in way too deep. So it was around
There was a
then.
recording of the frogs that I found in Barnes and Noble, which was sort of Escondido, California's like cultural institution. Like you would go there and that's where you could get all the musicals. And it was the one with the cover with the frog kind of just like coming out of the water that also
Yes, this
had
really
evening primrose in it.
gorgeous,
It's
like black
really
and white
beautiful.
photograph. Yeah.
And it's Nathan Lane and Brian Stokes Mitchell, I think.
Yeah.
As the duo.
Don't tell me that the frogs recording was your introduction to Sondheim, AJ. Was
No.
Okay.
My introduction to Sondheim was reading the insert of the Into the Woods cast recording because I had heard a couple songs from it, and I got to a point in Act 2 where they killed the narrator, and I think that has shaped my entire artistic life from that moment on. I'm like, you can do that? Like, it was just such like a transgression in my head of everything I had known about theater. And then Sweeney pretty much took over my life for 4 years, I think. I devoured it. I memorized like every single word of that score. And I think it remains my favorite musical. It is one of the most wholly complete and fully itself things. I mean, the problem is that every musical that I think is so fully itself and fully lived in and alive is all Sondheim. And we watched a clip of John Mulaney, who had played Sondheim in the documentary Now. Talking about Sondheim, and he's just like, Stephen Sondheim is my favorite, which is a very boring answer because everyone agrees with it. It's just like he's great. And
Unless
I wish
they
I could
write
say,
for The Guardian, apparently.
Oh yeah, that was so
Wait, what?
What
weird.
happened?
There
Yeah.
was this like, I think it was Guardian. It was one of those limey publications.
God, we can't
With
lose
some-
Britain.
Yes, we can. And we're going to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, some Brit with fucked up arches, horrible teeth, was like, "Oi,
Jesus.
that's Steve Sondheim. He can put all kinds of things on the stage, but is he Andrew Lloyd Webber? I don't think so."
I gotta say, your
Wait,
Andrew Lloyd
really?
Webber is
Yeah.
really coming along, Brian. That's almost flawless. I wrote Cinderella with trains, I did.
The person I'm picturing right now is one of the like old British men on the street in the new Beatles documentary who are like, they're making a lot of noise. They're shutting down the local businesses.
They're buying up all our furs.
Yeah, so the whole thing was just talking about how like other composers were more commercially successful than him. And I was like,
All right.
the guy
And-
didn't need any more commercial success though. Like,
Yeah, seriously.
When you knock it out of the park with, West Side that early in your career, it's just like you have residuals for life. Although
Right.
he didn't negotiate that, I guess.
yeah, he had at first he shared credit with Leonard Bernstein, and then he got the lyrics credit. He got a separate line on the posters and everything.
West Side had opened out of state and in Connecticut or something, and all the reviews were very positive, but they only mentioned Bernstein's involvement. It was like, this is the Bernstein's masterpiece, and didn't mention Sondheim at all. And then when they reconvened for rehearsals, Sondheim was like, ego a little bruised by that, was in a little bit
Yeah.
of a mood, and Leonard asked him, hey, like, why the long face? We have a hit on our hands. And he's like, I know I should be very grateful for this, but I'm a little worried that my involvement in this is just going to get written out of the history books and I'll be relegated to a footnote in the story of West Side Story. And Bernstein was like, all right, good point. I'll take the lyrics. They're yours, which I think is like an act of generosity. That's
And
sort of
then
like,
in addition, Sondheim was like, wow, that's great. And so Leonard Bernstein then said, and also we'll renegotiate the royalties so that you can get more from this. And he said, oh, you don't have to do that.
okay, well, that's pretty fucked up.
and ended up walking himself out of like tens of millions of dollars.
he
over
said
the
it was
course
the
of his
biggest
life.
regret of his life was
But I mean, in general, when it comes to anything theater or otherwise, I just stick to Worthington's law for Mr. Show. The more money equals better than.
Yeah.
Therefore, as we all know,
Starlight
Andrew Lloyd
Express
Webber.
is a better musical than A Little Night Music.
And that's one of those stories that I heard when I was still in college. And so I think that instilled something for me that was like, if someone offers you more money, just say, yeah. I'd love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Josh, what was your introduction to Sondheim?
My middle school did Into the Woods Junior. I did not do it. I was not in middle school at the time. It did it like a couple years after.
Josh
I
never
was
went
out.
to middle school. Skipped it.
Correct.
Did any of y'all
skipped it completely.
also do illegal productions of Into the Woods where you did Act 2, but they had only licensed
No.
Junior?
We did the full show.
No.
We licensed the full show.
Oh, wow.
No, we only did my middle school only did pretty much the whole canon except Sondheim, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of R&H, that kind of thing. But in terms of like when I really like found something and something of Sondheim resonated with me, it was Company. And specifically the recording of the John Doyle Broadway production of Company, which I watched, I think on Netflix or something. And it knocked my fucking socks off, honestly. Yeah. Like, there are things about that production that are choices that some of them work, some of them don't. But I think that as a whole, that show it captures something incredibly real and incredibly raw and incredibly painful about what it is to be married and be married for a long time. And having myself now been married for quite some time, I feel that its relevance and impact just, I don't know, I feel it more and more in many ways.
That's sort of the magic trick of Company, right? Like that it is that the book can feel very like dated and kind of stiff, but then you watch it and it's just like it feels like it's happening right now, even if they're talking about doing like karate for the first time. And isn't that crazy?
Being Alive is one of those songs that just, I don't know, it's almost too much to bear.
Yeah.
Which is the point.
And I think
that's the point of the
and
song.
I think that's such an interesting thing with Company too, is that it was too much to bear for Dean Jones.
Right.
Like, you know, we associate so much of that original production with Dean Jones, not the least because he's, of course, on the recording and he's in this amazing documentary about the recording.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing is the documentary, obviously, about the recording, as well as the parody, I almost said Democracy Now!, the parody documentary now.
Co-op the musical.
Parody Amy Goodman.
Did anyone see how, speaking of co-op, when Bradley Whitford, who played Sondheim mere weeks ago in the Tick, Tick, Boom film, posted a otherwise very lovely little like notes app eulogy on Twitter, you know, talking about why, you know, this is why Sondheim would do the things that no one else would do, and why, you know, and say why not? Like, why wouldn't I write a show about assassins? Well, I'll write a show about an apartment building. I'll write a show about blah. And then someone eventually was like, does he think that co-op is his company? Has he just permanently switched those two in his mind?
Company really does hit something that personally, because Dean Jones left the show 30 days into the Broadway run.
Right.
His own marriage was falling apart while he was playing Bobby. And I mean, Company had a long out of town. They were in Boston for a really long time. You can listen to soundboards of that show, and things are in a wildly different order. It's a very, very different beast. And by the time it got to Broadway, his own issues with like substance abuse and everything else led to him leaving the show and then not coming back to Broadway until he did the masterpiece Into the Light, the musical about why the Shroud of Turin is real. And
we have referenced this musical too many times for us
I'm
not
going
to
to reference
cover
this
it.
musical every single episode that we have. I still haven't found a bootleg. But so my first exposure to Sondheim, like most people except for Josh, it was also that 1-2 of Into the Woods and Sweeney Todd. Like, of course, everyone has heard like I Feel Pretty in some form, an Aquafina commercial or whatever. But I had no sense of who he was. Then we had this volunteer come to my high school who directed Into the Woods and told us all about Into the Woods. And I also started getting vocal lessons from her, and she had a bunch of books in her collection of Sondheim shows and would just sort of tell me about which ones were about what. And I thought that was so interesting. And like AJ, it was really Borders and Barnes and Noble that became my education. And it was every time we'd go into Albuquerque for something or other, we'd also go to Borders or Barnes and Noble, and I'd pick up a new album. And so while we were doing Into the Woods, I picked up the John Doyle Sweeney Todd with Michael Cerverus and Patti LuPone, and Assassins, the original off-Broadway recording of Assassins. And it was really listening to those on the drive back from Albuquerque that I didn't even know how to process it yet. Like, it was such I did not like musicals before coming across this work.
Right.
And figuring out why that is. Why is it that these musicals are different than the ones I've encountered before? And ones that I've actually since then have grown an appreciation for. But Sweeney Todd specifically, and then Assassins, I actually didn't like the first time I listened to it. I totally didn't get it. And then the second time I listened to it, I was like, okay.
I think
so it was a short journey, but yeah.
I think my confession is that I usually never liked a Sondheim show on first listen to it. It was only, but I felt so compelled to go back and re-listen to it that like on the second or third round, I'm like, it started to click. That's a testament to just how challenging it is to chew on. Like it's the Dark Souls of musicals.
Like it at first, you're somehow compelled, knowing that there's just more there than there normally is.
And that's why it's so important that his shows got recorded, as many of them have, when he worked with James Lapine, especially Sunday in the Park with George, because I don't think anyone knows what to do with Sunday in the Park with George the first time they see it, no matter what. Like, there's just so much there that you can't possibly put it all into place.
I just read the James Lapine just wrote a book about the sort of like a mixture of memoir and like oral history of the making of Sunday in the Park with George. It's incredibly thorough and specific. And I guess I had never realized or appreciated just how much kind of rejection that show got at every single step of the process. And how violently people were like, I just don't understand why we're here. Like even people in the cast were like, just give us a little bit more clarity about why this is what we're doing. And, obviously it is now a canonical masterpiece. That's my favorite Sondheim personally. It's also like, because not all of Sondheim's shows were financially or critically successful, and almost none of his ideas seemed like commercial, they had commercial prospects. And I think it's just a testament to like a incredibly good writer. He's also like an incredible like show off, in a way where even if you don't believe that the idea will make money, it's not a tune you can hum, etc. It's the execution is so impressive that it wins over almost anyone just on a sheer level of like, I'm impressed by this, even if I don't like or understand it yet.
I think that like the only shows that you can really like elevator pitch in a traditional way are that pair of Into the Woods and Sweeney, right?
Yeah.
Obviously you've got Twisted Fairy Tale.
And Sweeney Todd is very alienating just on the fact that it's so unpleasant.
Yes. Yeah.
It's such a dark subject for a musical if you're a fan of musical theater.
Right.
I guess that's true if you're a fan of traditional musical comedies, but it is cool.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
like
that's
cool
how I got
thing.
all of my friends in high school.
For dudes.
Like I got all of my friends into musical theater, and it was because of Sweeney Todd and Assassins. Yeah. Like I was like all of my friends were into metal, and I was just like, well,
these are the two most
metal as hell.
This is metal.
Yeah.
Like to the point where even Dee Snider ended up covering it as a metal song, the Ballad of Sweeney Todd as a metal song.
Really?
Oh, that's incredible.
The faces of gentlemen who never thereafter were heard of again. He trod a path that few have trod. Did Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
Sweeney Todd is also the first cast album that I can remember that includes several jump scares.
Yes. Sweeney Todd wanted to make a horror musical, the son of a bitch.
Right. Which is hard to do. You know how fucking hard it is to do horror
so he was
on
like,
stage?
let's get a fucking factory whistle.
Let alone a musical.
Whistle. I always forget. Whenever it's like I'm home and I turn on like XM radio and it's like the Broadway station. I'll see what show tunes are playing. Maybe it's something I like. And then it's like the fucking Ballad of Sweeney Todd. I always forget the whistle.
Yeah, you get the really quiet, like pipe organ stuff,
and it makes
then
you
just
turn up.
pierces through.
It makes you turn up your volume so you can hear the pipe organ, and then the whistle comes in and your speakers explode.
Yeah.
One of the scariest things I've ever seen in my life was a youth theater production of Sweeney Todd when I was in high school. It was they had the ensemble appear in the audience at one point. Right next to me, and I screamed and jumped out of my chair. But at the very end of the show, when they're like, isn't that Sweeney there beside you? And they start, pointing at the audience, there. All the lights went out in the theater, and then just fluorescent lights came up underneath them, and they were all wearing secret makeup so that it looked like they had like skulls on their faces.
Oh, that's
cool.
That's awesome.
Glowed, and Sweeney was just there.
Youth theater. Was this community theater or high school theater?
Yeah, I was going to say
it was community youth theater.
Wow, both.
And they were making like actual creative decisions and strong choices and pulling
They
them
had
off.
rented the set
They don't fuck
from
around
the
in
old
San Diego.
Globe production.
Yeah.
That was just in
okay.
storage. So they had the rotating set, they had the slide, the little thing. The guy who played Sweeney, his name was Gadali. I don't remember his last name. But he was like, I think 5'3", 5'4", and the woman playing Lovett was like 6'2". So
As it
cool.
should be, honestly. That makes a lot of sense.
at the end of By the Sea,
More like teeny Todd.
Got him.
That's what they called the Circle in the Square revival of Sweeney Todd in the 80s with Bob Gunton. They called it Teeny Todd because it was just done with like a couple of synthesizers.
but they at the end of By the Sea, Lovett leaned down and fully picked Sweeney off his feet and kissed him on the mouth and then put him back down. And I'm like, I'll never see anything better than this.
That's absolutely incredible. Oh my God.
It is fascinating that he spent so much of his life battling critics and battling audiences who just didn't get it and didn't really want to make that leap.
And even shows that got praise. I mean, the first 3 shows that he did on Broadway, no one gave a shit about him. Like West Side Story. West Side Story was not a hit on Broadway, right? It was a hit as a movie.
Oh,
and
right,
he was,
right.
again, mostly ignored. He got that credit. He did Gypsy. He probably composed a bit more for Gypsy than will ever be officially acknowledged. Like Rose's Turn was probably written by him.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Again, it was Julie Stein that got the notice. It was Ethel Merman who got the notice. It was Arthur Lawrence and his script. Then he did A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and there it was. There was your first score. He actually wrote all of the songs, wrote all of the lyrics for this show. This thing got like 6 Tony Awards or 8 Tony Awards, something like that. What it didn't get was anything in the realm of songwriting. And I do think it's a pretty weak score overall. But, he and then after that it was like Anyone Can Whistle, So
which is just pure unadulterated like Sondheim rage, just condensed into one
show
musical.
that flopped so bad it killed 2 people in it.
Wait, what?
When they were out of town, a chorus member fell off of the stage into the pit and ended up dying from his injuries.
Holy
and there was
fuck.
another star. This one's kind of funny. There was another star. I don't remember who he was playing. He was playing one of the main male roles. Had a heart attack right on stage and standing in front of Angela Lansbury.
I mean, if there's one thing Murder, She Wrote has taught us is that you don't want to get too close to Angela Lansbury because
Definitely
you'll
don't.
end up
Don't
dead.
do it.
And that show ran for 9 performances, I think, or 6.
Wow,
It
was that short? I thought at least it got
About a week. Like
12 previews and 9 performances.
9 performances.
Jeez.
So a week and then a little bit.
Oh, and they put that up at the fucking Majestic. So this is like you're talking like you're trying to fill a 1,600 seat theater. That's insane.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's a really good
Why would
point.
they do that?
Yeah.
With a 3-act musical.
That thing was 3. Okay, that explains a lot.
3 acts.
I don't know about
That's
y'all,
why
but-
there's the whole big ballet, but of course they didn't record all of that. But
listening to Anyone Can Whistle has always been very hard for me because it's just like there are like good songs in there, but the first song,
like
My Town,
Simple is fantastic.
12 minutes long, and it just I run into that brick wall every time I try and listen to it again because I do like to listen to them sequentially, and it's just it's an Everest to climb.
The first time that I really tried to go from fan to completist was I got a copy of Sondheim and Co., which is a great old book that specifically focuses on his collaborations or the collaborative nature of his musicals. And I was like, great, I'm going to go through chapter by chapter, listen or re-listen to everything as it comes up. By the end of this book, I'm going to be like the authority on Sondheim, and anyone can whistle is just the brick wall. Sorry, there's a siren outside my apartment.
That's okay.
They're coming to arrest me for not liking anyone can whistle.
Oh my God.
That's just my emergency podcast siren making its way down.
Oh, good,
Brooklyn.
yeah. But that
Again, it takes time.
Just wait for the Tim Allen grunt.
but that's where I kind of like that those ambitions fell flat at that point, because I was like, wow, this is long. And
Yeah.
big.
And it's also like, I also tried to do the same thing when the Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat
Sure,
came out. I
yeah.
tried to work my way through it. And Anyone Can Whistle, I kind of have to accept it's just one of those ones I don't think I'm ever gonna really get. But to be fair, it's, again, because it is so much, it's just like Rage the musical.
Yeah.
It's not an easy listen because it feels so caustic.
Well, and I think part of the problem, and Sondheim talks about that. He says, we thought we were being smart and we came off being smart-assed, is that, to put on my little hammer and sickle hat, the problem with Anyone Can Whistle is that
is a very tall hat.
Cannot escape liberalism at all. Like, it cannot find a solution to the problems that it puts forth. It wants to be this sort of Friedrich Dürrenmatt story. And Dürrenmatt couldn't escape liberalism either, but he had at least his apocalyptic pessimism to serve him. But Lawrence and Sondheim didn't know where to take the story. And Lawrence was also directing as well as writing the script, which works for James Lapine, does not work for Arthur Lawrence.
He's one of the few
Doesn't work
that
for
works.
most people.
Yeah, I don't know how Lapine
Yeah.
does it, because his books are out of this world good.
Lapine apparently did it just by smoking a lot of weed all the time.
Yeah,
That's
he
the way
was
he says
super
it.
stoned
That's
most of the
another
time.
Honestly-
another highlight of that putting it together book is Lapine, who has an infuriatingly quick rise to power as like it boy of directing and writing musicals, where he was like, he designed posters at Princeton or something, and they were like, hey, do you want to direct a musical? And he was like, yeah, all right. And then like it transferred off Broadway, and then he won an Obie Award, and then he was writing with Stephen Sondheim. It's like this is so
Like,
frustrating.
there are no lessons you can draw from
No, I'm
Lapine's
like,
whole
all right,
thing.
I guess I'll try designing posters for it. No, but
He's sort of like the last kid who was like pulled off the street, and it's like, you got moxie, you're writing a musical.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, exactly. But he when he has to go up to Sondheim's creepy puzzle apartment and finally
walks
meet
in
the
the
guy,
door,
you know,
walks in the door and sees the Game of the Perfidious Jew plastered on the wall.
Exactly. When he's a young guy and he's incredibly nervous, and Sondheim just like hands him a bag full of weed, being like, "Hey, relax."
I think the thing that gets me about James Lapine too is that like it's so hard to do a second production of any of his shows because of that fact, because of the fact that the dramaturgy of his shows, the direction and the book are always so intertwined.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a hold of the script for Into the Woods, like that's why high schools do it, and it's 3 hours long every time, is because Lapine writes these entire 3-page segments that are all supposed to just completely overlap. Like, you're not supposed to get any of the dialogue, and he probably cut it off a page and a half in when they were doing it, but the published version still has all the words that don't matter. Like, the dialogue for the painting that rolls in right before No Life in Sunday in the Park with George, that has a full page of dialogue in it, where the guy lying in the foreground of the painting is actually a pervert, and he's calling out to the kids
but that was a song, wasn't it?
That was, he wanted it to be a song, but that dialogue is still there. It's just noise and orchestrations, though, as they're rolling in while this guy is like...
And Lapine's genius is that he is very much a let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks approach when it comes to both direction and book writing. Like, it's sad. My impression from this account of the creative process of that show is that, like, it was them trying a million different things, book and staging wise, over and over and over again, while Sondheim is fully out of the room, taking an incredibly long time to write all the actual music, and not having, key pieces of that score until very late in the game. And if I was, in an actor in that production, I'd be freaking out too, because I'd be like, we can't just like...
Oh, I would have lost my mind.
Well, Patinkin was talking about quitting, right? Patinkin threatened to walk a couple times.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, though, partially out of like frustration with how slow it was going, and partially out of just, I think, insecurity of being like, I can't be out there alone on stage pretending to paint dots onto a little canvas and just talking about the abstract character development of this person. Like, I need something to actually perform. And I think he was stressed out that he just didn't have
and that's
that
why,
for so long.
like, when you hear the story, like when Finishing the Hat was written, he actually did it the night it was brought to the rehearsal room. Like he performed it that night by just gluing the pages into the sketchbook and reading it.
That's so cool.
And some of that tells you like the work ethic.
That's incredibly fucking cool.
Of Mandy Patinkin, but like it also tells you like the desperation that he was to have like just fucking anything to do out there.
Right.
Mandy Patinkin is like an actor's actor too. You know what I mean? Like he is so devoted to the process and to getting every last sort of piece of truth out of the thing, regardless. And when you take something like Sunday in the Park, which requires, I think, in the room, when you are developing something like that, it requires active participation from the person who is portraying that and performing that to bring it out. That's how you get that kind of magic. And that's the sort of nature of the collaboration and how a lot of this stuff came about, which we've been doing a little bit already of. But I think that a lot of people who don't do theater think that like you have a script, you rehearse the script, you put it up on its feet and it's done. And that's nowhere close to what it's
well, and so Graham touched on something where you mentioned Sondheim as an auteur, and he's not an auteur in the sense that he works alone, certainly.
Right. That's the interesting thing.
There's almost no musicals that are written by one person. Every once in a while, I think Tale of Two Cities was written by one person.
Oliver was written by one person, and The Mystery of Edwin Drood was written by one person. So something about Dickens pulls that out of people. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, did everything for Hamilton. Yeah, no, and Sondheim will be the first to always say that like everything that good that comes from his musicals was because of his collaborators. Like Lapine's process is he would just write monologues, right, and then send them over to Sondheim, and then Sondheim would turn those monologues into song. Notoriously, that was like I think in Finishing the Hat. No, in Look, I Made a Hat. Lapine. He publishes Lapine's original monologue.
It's amazing,
for
about
the drop of sweat,
and it's so good. Like the monologue is so good,
and it's something that like it's the first draft. That's it. But Sondheim also loves Lapine's monologues. And if you get the libretto, the published libretto for Sunday in the Park with George, the one that's like sold in like paperback book form. There's a monologue in Act 2 that you can't do because George has to get his beard off. But it's this really great monologue of George on his deathbed as the whole painting is starting to go white and everyone else is telling their stories about Surratt at the end of his life.
I gotta check that out.
Wow. I've never seen that. Yeah.
It's the off and running monologue. I think you can find it. And that was Sondheim. That was Sondheim, again, because he's so conscientious of the people that he works with. He had that put in because of how much esteem he had for it. When he won his first Tonys, he won a Tony for, they had split songwriting, right? So they had split it up into lyrics and composition. And he goes up there, and this is like classic, like 1970s Sondheim, where he's still not quite comfortable getting in front of a camera or in front of a crowd just yet.
Sure.
And he gets up there and, he says, well, it's nice to win an award. And then he for his first speech says, there's also the music director. There's also the orchestrator. These people deserve awards too. And that's pretty much his whole speech. And then he walks off. He gets the second award. He comes back on and he says, it's also nice to win 2 awards. And he walks off again.
Was this when he had the little lad who loves berries and cream haircut? Is that was that this era of Sondheim?
No, he didn't have that hair at that point, at that particular point in time. I think he had cut it so that he could go to the Tonys and look like a reasonable human being.
Was it for Company that he first won? What were his first Tonys?
Yeah, that's his first Tony.
Yeah,
and so he got 2.
And that was a hell of a streak. People talk about like that the 70s streak for Sondheim is like, and I don't know if a composer will ever top it in terms of just back to back, like just absolute banger. Because it was Company, Follies.
It was Company and Follies, like they were a year apart from each other. And then A Little Night Music was within the next 2 years. And then he did Pacific Overtures.
Yeah.
And ended out the decade
let's not
with Sweeney.
Skip over our friends, the Frogs, please. Let's not leave
and
our
then
friends,
he went to Yale and had
frogs.
a miserable experience with a show he didn't like very much. That I will have to say this about the Frogs, though. The score is not great. It doesn't fire all the neurons that a Sondheim score does when you listen to it.
Right.
Every song in it is very good, though. Like, there's not a bad song in that score.
I actually recently, last night, I was up until 4 a.m. because I was singing Sondheim karaoke at Club Cumming in the city.
Oh, nice.
And I learned, because there was no frogs representation, because why would there be? So I decided that I would do a frog song, because I think Ariadne, which is actually a very beautiful love song. It's Dionysus's love song. He's singing about his wife who has died.
Yeah.
It starts off very cocky, very Dionysus, and then it actually gets to like a very real sad place where he's just like, I miss my fucking wife. I miss her every fucking day. I have a constellation in the sky that I can look at that reminds me of how much I loved her and how much I miss her every day. And I think it's actually a very beautiful song, but I was looking at the sheet music for it. All of that stuff about him being like a braggadocio at the beginning of it, just like saying how, how attractive she was and how, boisterous she was and how she was able to mingle with gods and like how cool that was.
I mean, when you're married to a god, mingling with the likes of Zeus and Hera, Aphrodite and Apollo.
Name dropper.
And then when he gets real and emotional at the end, Sondheim inverts it.
It reminds me of how much I miss her and want her and wish every day she were here.
And to have a composer for a musical that, again, Sondheim doesn't seem like he liked very much. Like even the
No, I mean, you get to the
Broadway
chapter
version.
in Finishing the Hat, and he has almost nothing to say about the Broadway version other than it failed.
Yeah.
I don't think he was miserable making that show, but when he talks about the original production at Yale, he just hates it. He just hates every part of that process. He hates the person who commissioned it.
It is fascinating to me that even in a project that he did not particularly like, he took the time to compose a song that when you listen to it, you're like, this is moving me. I don't know why. And then you go and you look at the parts and you're like, oh my
There's a
God,
reason,
it's
yeah.
built
Yeah.
into the music. That's insane.
It's incredible.
So much of what defines Sondheim, obviously, is these collaborations, right? And whether we're talking about collaborations with librettists or directors or whatever else, obviously like with directors with Hal Prince and James Lapine as well. You have longtime collaborations with performers. One of the things that I find striking about a lot of Sondheim is how the performances, the songs, the actual numbers are so defined by the people who originated the performances in many ways. Like Ladies Who Lunch being an obvious example, like that song could not exist without Elaine Stritch, right? Like
He was banging his head against the wall for company because he didn't have an 11 o'clock number, and clock was ticking, and Sondheim, was sort of a notorious procrastinator. So he was just like, I don't know what to do. Because he didn't know Elaine Stritch very well, and he's like, and he really wanted to like tailor it to her, and so he asked Hal Prince, well, just tell me a story. Just tell me any story about Elaine Stritch. And he said, okay. So one day we went over to Elaine's place, and we were having a party, and we were getting pretty significantly sloshed. And 2 a.m. rolls around, and we're having like a really great time. And Elaine comes into the room and says, "We're going to a bar," and she just storms out of the house. And they all look at each other. It's like, well, I guess we're going to a bar. So they like frantically like put on their coats. They go outside and they follow Elaine, and she staggers into the bar. Again, people are like closing up, and the bartender says, "Hey, we had last call." And Elaine Stritch goes to the bar, slams her fist on the table, and says, "Give me a bottle of vodka and a floor plan."
Oh my God.
And Sondheim wrote Ladies Who Lunch later that night.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
And brought it in the next day.
That's incredible.
And Sondheim was known for, he would have actors audition for him, not as like an audition of, will I get the role, but as a, I need to know how to write for you. So like I remember
Right.
the first piece of news that came out about Sweeney Todd happening was that he had Johnny Depp audition for him, because he wanted to know if he needed to write something new for Johnny Depp. Mandy Patinkin hates auditioning. And he thought after Evita, he was like, thank Christ, I'll never have to fucking audition ever again in my entire life.
Right.
And then he already has the part for Sunday in the Park with George, but he's told, you have to audition for Sondheim. And he's like, oh my God, why does this have to happen? And at that point, Sondheim had only written Color and Light, to my knowledge. And that's why Color and Light is a baritone song.
Oh,
wow,
interesting.
that's so interesting. I never thought about that.
All the other songs are written to fit all of his sort of mix, falsetto voice, fucking Mandy Patinkin bullshit. But that song is like something that I can sing because Sondheim needed to get a sense of his voice. And he did the same with Lonnie Price for writing Good Thing Going and Franklin Shepherd Incorporated. With Jason Alexander, you have kind of a different story.
An amazing story. Go for it.
So Jason Alexander, he's 19 years old when he's doing Merrily We Roll Along.
But it has the charisma already of like a 35-year-old professional.
Yes, I believe
entertainer.
Sondheim said he was the only one who convincingly could play middle aged because he was born at the age of 35.
Just one of those guys who was born old. Yeah. Like Wallace Shawn, same kind of vibe.
But with the corner of an angel.
So he goes to Jason Alexander and he's like, "Is there anything you can't do?" And he's like, "Oh, I can't do chromatics.
And I can't hear it." This is leading up to he needs to write a second act opener for Merrily. That's like the assignment, and he's telling Jason like, it's gonna be on your shoulders. So before I do that, like, what can't you do?
Yeah, it's like, this is the big song that you're gonna sing. Aside from eventually opening doors, he's like, I can't do half steps. I can't do sharps and flats. Like chromatic scales, impossible for me. And so Sondheim's like, okay. And he comes back and the entire thing is,
Hold it, folks, there's still the reviews left. Both the trim and the news left. Early, surly, not a good sign. Also, even if there's a chance, folks, let's not forget the advance, folks. Not a lot of cash, folks.
It's the whole thing. It's the only.
It's quite a, and I love It's a Hit. It's one of my favorite numbers in that show. But it is it's sort of a jarring transition musically from this sort of bouncy show tune into this very foreboding, grim little section. And Jason Alexander's like, sorry, I said I can't do those. Not that I can do those. And sometimes just like, you're gonna need to learn.
Yeah. Because again, he had him in mind because he was like, I'm writing for a bunch of teenagers. These people are going to have careers going forward. And Jason Alexander actually did have a career going forward. And so he's like, I'm going to make him learn because he doesn't have the opportunity otherwise.
What a curmudgeon. What a good teacher. I mean, that's the thing he loved doing more than anything else.
We always talk about how complicated and how difficult Sondheim's songs are. But there's such a vast resource of Sondheim musical stars who aren't necessarily singers or aren't necessarily technically adept. Like Mako has one of the most complicated songs that Sondheim ever wrote with Pacific Overtures and its opening number, The Advantages of Floating in the Middle of the Sea.
In the middle of the world we'd float, in the middle of the sea. The realities remain remote, in the middle of the sea. Kings are burning somewhere, wheels are turning somewhere, trains are being run, wars are being won, things are being done somewhere out there, not here. Here we paint screens.
And he couldn't get it for weeks. He just couldn't get it. And he was worried he was going to get fired. And Sondheim was like, no, you're going to get it. You'll get it.
The interesting thing about, I think he frequently, I was talking with a friend of mine the night he died who pointed out that he always referred to his performers as actors, not as singers. Like he was thinking of them through that lens. Right. And one of the really fun things to appreciate about Sondheim is it would be so fucking annoying if Sondheim, on top of everything else, was a great vocalist, but luckily he is not. He is really not. I mean, like he's got a very limited instrument there, and yet there is something so incredibly powerful. Like you're just tapping something straight from the source about hearing him in any sort of demo, or if he ever performed live, like hearing him just kind of croak out these these complicated numbers that are designed for people with very formidable singing voices, and him just like doing it. It sounds kind of like this, and it's something incredibly charming about that.
Well, he had an entire album released called Sondheim Sings, which
That's
I
just
got.
his demos, yeah.
Let me tell you, that is not a great album
That's
to
for
put on.
That's for the real heads. That's for the people who want to hear the alternate.
That's for the Bride Alfords
That's for
of
the
the
people who
world.
want to hear the alternate tune of With So Little to Be Sure Of, or they want to hear the way that he rigged up his piano to play the different instruments for Pacific Overtures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will never get his delivery of Show Me a Sign out of my head.
Let me see a spider in the morning. Let me dream a river overflowed. Let me see a spider on the ceiling in the morning, or a ribbon pointing northward in the road. Show me a sign. Blessings on my husband. Show me a sign.
The song Prayers, yeah.
Yeah, which was cut, but it's incredible.
And all of the pieces of Prayers end up finding their way into There Is No Other Way, into the Shogun sequence, into all these other pieces. And I think that since I'm talking about Pacific Overtures, so much of the joy of discovering Sondheim's work is because his work spans such a great amount of time, because of the obscurity of musical theater relative to other forms of pop culture, and because of the way the internet just used to be back in the day. I remember finding out not only that Pacific Overtures existed, because for some reason Barnes & Noble didn't have that CD.
They didn't. The original cast recording was almost impossible to find until the B.D. Wong version came, the revival.
Yeah, and the original is still very poorly remastered. It would be nice for someone to go in and actually clean it up. But now you can watch the whole thing. But it used to be on YouTube, you could only upload things in 10-minute increments.
Yeah,
that's right.
Oh my God.
And there was a website. It was called operarecordingstapes.com.net.biz, whatever. Some obscure website. And it was just a blog. And it just had a list of shows that it had. And you had to send like $50 or a trade-in order to get whatever this thing that was recorded was. And they had Pacific Overtures. And I remember...
I love that you could send a trade-in. That's so fucking old school. That's cool as hell.
My first online community was the Sweeney Todd message board on IMDb, which rest in peace, IMDb message boards. This is how much like Stephen Sondheim's work has ended up shaping my life. And someone on that board ended up buying Pacific Overtures and putting it on YouTube. And this was a tape of a tape of a tape of a tape of the original broadcast that was done in Japan of the Broadway production of Pacific Overtures. So there were parts that blanked out. There were parts that repeated. Most of all the color was drained. The sound was garbled, and you had to watch it in these 10-minute increments. And I devoured it. It was my senior year of high school. It got put up, and I watched every single part, and I was so fascinated by everything that was there. And now, lo and behold, you can watch it in full color. It's not in its ideal form, but it's
better than that.
It's pretty fucking great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can also all agree that Sondheim is the reason we all passed AP US history in high school because President Fillmore, now named Pierce, very important for a lot of the forgotten presidents. And then also Assassins, knowing the name Leon Czolgosz, for example, and knowing how to spell it is a huge help. But anyway, Brian, you were saying
the
about...
slow discovery of everything that Sondheim has done. And just after he died, I found out that when he was in college, someone posted these scans of a letter that he wrote to August Derleth at Arkham House so that he could do a radio adaptation of The Rats in the Walls for Williams College, like their radio station. The amount of stuff that he did, the number of things he had these connections to, you always end up discovering more strange, weird things. Like the movie Stavisky, or
great score.
Like
the stuff he wrote for Warren Beatty movies.
I've seen him act.
For the Reds, yeah.
I saw Sondheim in June Moon. I was able to find the TV production of June Moon that he was in to watch that.
I just, upon my most recent rewatch of The Birdcage, the little song that Nathan Lane sings in The Birdcage, like in rehearsal.
What is this dream I see?
That is a Stephen Sondheim.
He writes that.
What an interesting fuck you to Jerry Herman, too. Holy shit.
The song that he sings with the mother of his child is Love in the Air. Love is in the Air, which is cut from The Funny Thing Happened Other Way at the Forum. He also wrote...
It takes all kinds. It takes Bimbo. It takes Dumbo. It takes Rambos and Columbo.
No, they're fucking garbage. It's amazing.
Yeah, I would expect Sondheim doing that just doesn't track. Like
it's like Sondheim doing Rappin' Into the Woods. You're just kind of like, exactly. This might be beyond you, man.
Well, just outside of it, it's like everybody has their wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
Like Stephen Sondheim is no Donna Summer, and that's fine.
We weren't asking
Nor
him to do
should
that.
Stephen Sondheim be. Exactly.
Well, he's someone who's weirdly, for being, if you watch the company documentary, you are watching him be very precise and exacting and prescriptive about things. In a very sort of passive-aggressive kind of way.
Booby.
Let's hear you say it.
Wait, booby.
That's it. Booby.
But when I sing it, it goes, Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
No, booby.
Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
Booby.
Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
Supposing you had to say goody, how would you say that, Bobby?
Goody.
Yeah. Bobby, baby, Bobby, goody.
Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
That's it. That's it.
I
It's
think
exactly the
that's
same.
just him.
Same vowel sound is good. Exactly the same vowel sound is good.
Booby, Bobby.
Booby.
think
First
it's
lips.
just
Booby.
that way.
Bobby, booby.
Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
No, you're still doing it. Say goody. Say booby.
Booby, Bobby.
That's it. Exactly as if we're goody. Now, I know you're going to sing goody this time, but nevertheless.
And yet, he was someone who was very, this goes back to the collaborator talk, like, he was very aware of his limitations and maybe too fixated on his limitations to the point where, which I think engendered amazing collaborations, specifically with book writers, because I think it's like each of his main, what is it? It's Lapine.
John Weidman.
Would be and Arthur Lawrence.
There's James Goldman.
Yeah.
Burt Shevelove and Larry Gelbart.
Hugh Wheeler, yeah, man, and his book for Love Light Music is just like unbelievably good, considering it's fully adapting an already great movie.
And I mean the liberties that he takes, that Hugh Wheeler takes with the Smiles of a Summer Night script.
Yeah,
like the Russian roulette scene in the movie. It just turns out that the Dragoon has loaded the gun with gunpowder. So it's really more about the character of the Dragoon and just another moment to sort of humiliate Egerman. But in the play, it's even more humiliating for Egerman because his hand is shaking so much because he's such an old man. He's still dealing with that middle age of his that he misses himself when he shoots himself in the face.
But it's that thing of like, when Warren Beatty went to him to write stuff for Reds and was like, hey, like, I'm putting this insane thing together and I want you to like write some music for it. Like, Sondheim was very much like bashful, like, oh yeah, I don't know if I could, people won't like it and I wouldn't do a good job. Like, he was weirdly.
Yeah, he was like, I can't write the instruments. I don't know if I want to do it. I don't like the Internationale.
Where did that come from? Like, where did that,
And then he turns the Internationale into a love song.
Incredible.
Like, motherfucker, like, yeah, he did something impossible and no one even knew at first that's what he had done.
And it's not a false modesty either.
That's the
this is not a situation of him like being like, oh no, but seriously, like, there are interviews with him where you don't go through life being this well decorated and this accomplished without having a sense of your own talent. And he absolutely was aware of what his talent was.
I think that Sondheim not only had one of the most acute senses of his own talent of any artist, he also had this incredible ability to teach you about it. I don't know anyone who has such an objective approach to their own work. And Sondheim, and it's not like he didn't touch it anymore and then he was able to be objective. Every time they revived Sweeney or something, you'd always find a new lyric that he replaced.
Company all over the place, like every single production company.
Things.
Right up until
this last revival,
this last
he was like, why
revival.
not? Let's switch things up. I mean, it's like this weird comedy. I mean, he's full of these like I think it's what makes him such an interesting, one of the things that makes him such an interesting artist. He's full of these like personal contradictions. He's both very exacting and very like, whatever, do whatever you want. I don't care. He's both like, well, I know that I'm a genius. I assume that he did. And like, oh no, I can't pull this off. That's why I shouldn't do that. He had both of those things as a part of his character.
And there was such a workman quality to him too, like he would be in interviews. I mean, I think my favorite story about this is listening to the commentary track for Sunday in the Park with George, that pro tape, where Mandy Patinkin is losing his shit by the end of it, like just actively like scream sobbing into the microphone. And he's just saying, I miss it so much.
Oh my God,
and
Mandy,
Sondheim, cool as a cucumber, just says, well, now we have it forever.
Wow. Oh, God. I'm impressive that Sondheim was cool as a cucumber because he was a famous sobber. An easy cry for sure.
Well, and Graham, I actually wanted to talk to you about that because it's interesting what people single out when someone passes and like what they put online or however what thing they fixate on. And you posted one of the most difficult things I have ever watched in my life. So I didn't watch it again. I saw that you posted it. But it's Michael Bennett's funeral, and it's Sondheim performing Move On.
Oh wow!
Oh my God!
Could you talk to us about that moment in particular and why that spoke to you?
Yeah, I mean it's obviously like an incredibly sad event.
Yeah.
You know, more tragic even than Sondheim's passing because Michael Bennett was a very young man. Not to compare, deaths or whatever, but like it was this really shocking.
Right, Michael was dying. He died of AIDS, and he died of AIDS during this ongoing epidemic that was growing.
If our country's fucking response to it wasn't such a fucking catastrophe, grounded in evangelical moralizing and all that bullshit, it's possible he would still be with us.
So okay, in that sense, yes. Fairer to say this was sadder than Sondheim's.
Yeah.
But
who died?
Sondheim's a bummer, obviously, but he was
90
he was
a very old.
He was old as shit.
The last time
he
that
was happy.
Yeah, he seemed very content. It is
surrounded by family.
Exactly. Yeah. Like when I saw him, it's interesting. When I saw him on Colbert a couple weeks or months ago, whenever that was, where he gave this interview.
It was about 2 weeks before he died. Yeah,
and he seemed very happy and in full possession of his faculties and everything. But it just struck me for the first time in a while, like, oh, this guy is very, very old. We might not have that much longer with him, which is why it was interesting that when he died, I had prepared myself to prepare myself that we probably wouldn't have him with us much longer. And then when my mom called upstairs, like, hey, Stephen Sondheim just died, I was not prepared for it at all. I don't know why. I separated that, but
But I think that in the both in that interview and the interview that he did for CBS Sunday Morning with Patti LuPone, you can see he knows what's coming.
Yeah.
Like he's very aware of where he's at. Anyway, let's go back to the Michael Bennett thing.
Well, Michael Bennett, the creator, one of the creators of a chorus line. Obviously, he had this like it was also this sense of like, wow, this is a career. And a genius just being cut short,
And he was choreographer for Follies and Company.
Yes. So it was a person. It wasn't just like they were peers in the industry. They were collaborators. And Sondheim, takes out. It's on YouTube, but he takes out his sheet music. He says a little like introduction as if he's talking to Michael Bennett, which is very moving. And then he plays "Move On," and as we were talking, plays and sings it. And as we were just discussing before. It's not the most technically perfect rendition of that song, but he is actively choking back his emotion the entire time, right up until the very end, where it almost seems like he must leave the stage. He can't bear to be out here any longer. He says, "Thank you, Michael. Goodbye, Michael." Grabs his sheet music, and just like hightails it before he starts, fully keening, in the way that he could really do at the drop of a hat. It's an incredible document just of like, for as much as he had in common with George Seurat, like this is where he differs. Like he is not a cold or reserved person. He is somehow both a very professional and focused dude and an incredibly, incredibly human artist.
Yeah. His heart is absolutely
so on his sleeve. And as much as people have ever accused him of being, too intellectualizing, too cold, too
it's
clever.
It's not a tune you can hum.
It's not a tune you can hum, like as much as people have always found that to be such a bizarre criticism of him.
Yeah.
But it's one that he faced down for his entire career because he wasn't writing Arcangel,
So hilariously makes fun of it in Merrily Roll Along, which is also his most hummable score.
His most hummable score. And also he, has like the other than that, that video of him doing Move On, the first thing that I like, I have to listen to this right now. Stephen Sondheim is dead was that middle section of the Good Thing Going, segment of Merrily, just because it's like he had. That's obviously a very well-constructed song, but it is very simple. is not all frills
Yes.
and is not a super complicated rhyme scheme, and it is boiling down to the essentials. He was not like an as much as he was a total show off who wanted to pack all of his fancy tricks and everything.
Well, he had a bag of tricks. Everybody's got a bag of tricks, right?
Tricks of all time.
He had so
and he
many
put
tricks,
them all in at the same time, and it's another contradiction. He was someone who knew how to like boil it down to the essentials of what it needed to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was not he was not extra, even though he was so extra.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
And only moments no more, because we knew we had this good thing going. And if I wanted too much, was that such a mistake at the time? You never wanted enough. All right, tough, I don't make that a crime.
To the point too of like, I don't know, intellectualism versus emotion or whatever. That is something that I have always felt is a real false dichotomy,
Yes.
but it's something that
It's
more
something
often than
that stupid people say to justify why they just don't like something.
Yes.
Yes, and it's also something I think that hacks say when they don't know how to write emotion and so rely on being clever instead.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really fucking appreciate about Stephen Sondheim is that, yes, he was witty, but he was never too clever. You know what I mean? Like, instead, those clever, the clever moments that exist are moments that exist to let you in rather than keep you out. It's like the opposite of like David Foster Wallace, where it's like, writing a whole bunch of really clever stuff just to show off how smart he was. Whereas I think with Sondheim, it was more using the tricks, using the things that he was capable of doing to actually draw you in further and ultimately create something that at least when it succeeded, which was most of the time, felt deeply, deeply human and heartfelt.
I think Sondheim's cleverest lyrics to come from On the Steps of the Palace, where you're safe out of sight in yourself, but where everything's wrong or where everything's right and you know that you'll never belong, and whichever you pick, do it quick because you're starting to stick to the steps of the palace. All of that, when you say it, it's just like, oh, wow, he's really like jerking off there. But you hear the song and it just trickles. It's like water flowing down a staircase.
What if you are what a prince would envision? Although how can you know who you are till you know what you want, which you don't? So then which do you pick? Where you're safe out of sight and yourself, but where everything's wrong? Or where everything's right and you know that you'll never belong? And whichever you pick, do it quick, 'cause you're starting to stick to the steps of the palace.
It's such a perfect little song for Cinderella to be singing. And the songs that really have the most fireworks in them are not the songs that have the most clever things in them. Although Sondheim knew how to be fucking clever. I have his crossword puzzles.
They're framed behind him.
Yeah. No, I found them on a blog once and I printed them all out and gave them as a Christmas present to my brother because he loves that shit.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Great.
I've been in so deep, guys.
I hope my best friend who loves Sondheim doesn't listen to this episode so that I can steal that for his Christmas present. If that's all right with you, Brian.
Yes. Yeah. Just put him on the mute list when you post about this.
Good. Yeah.
His big fireworks things were all for the performer.
Yes, exactly.
It was stuff like Franklin Shepherd Inc. Franklin Shepherd Inc. is not like a song that has stuff like Still Standing Stuck in the Stuff on the Steps or the Paunch or the Pouch or the Pension. It's got...
Sorry, Charlie. Secretary, on the intercom. Yes, Miss Biz, it's a messenger. Thanks, Miss Biz. Would you tell him to wait? Would you order the car? Would you call up the bank? Would you wire the coast? Would you ring? Sorry, Charlie. Mutter, 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 sell the stock. Mutter, buy the rights. Mutter, 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 let me put you on hold. Yes, Miss Biz, it's the interview. Thanks, Miss Biz. Will you tell him to wait? Will you wire the car? Will you order the coast? Will you send up the bank?
You got to do a bunch of voices. You got to do a lot of things. You got to jump back and forth. And that just makes you fall in love with whoever is fucking doing it, whether it's Raul Esparza, whether it's Lonnie Price. It's just such a marvelous number. And all of his, like Kiss Me, which is very musically clever for sure, But
Right.
again, you just get to enjoy the fireworks of these two performers singing two different things at each other as fast as they can.
It's not a gate. You don't have a gate is still gets me every single time.
The other thing about, I mean, the people, I guess a relatively common comment is that it's just like he is inspiring emotion with you in even these songs.
Yeah.
It's just not, the emotion isn't always love. With Franklin Shepherd Inc., it's like that creates a well of emotion in you, but the emotion is resentment. You're just like, oh my God, this is such a fucking frustrating situation for this guy to be in.
The subtext to that song and the scene that it's in is this guy completely blowing up his entire relationship with this other man.
Yes, exactly.
Right. On television.
Yeah.
In front of the entire world.
No, but I mean, the song that, Josh, to get back to your point, there's only one song that I think Sondheim ever wrote that is clever at the expense of the actual performers, and that's Bobby and Jackie and Jack, which I think Sondheim himself admits is just like, this is really masturbatory. I actually don't really like this song. And he's like, we've tried to fix it in every version of Merrily that we've ever done.
It works much better in the 90s revival.
But also, I think that song is justifiable because because it's young composers like trying to like do a song. It's like their first cabaret, and it's not supposed to be great. And I think that's it has sort of a late night, I guess, University of Michigan vibe about it.
Yeah. Well, it has the vibe. There's a song that he wrote that we don't have the music to, but we have the lyrics to in Look, I Made a Hat. It was something that he wrote for a TV special with Burt Shevelove at the end of the 50s, and it was supposed to be like a celebration of the 50s, because Sondheim never did the cabaret thing, right? Because he got out of college, he wrote for a TV show for 2 years, did a fellowship with Milton Babbitt.
It was the Dana Carvey show, actually. It was him and Charlie Kaufman.
Yes. Louis C.K. So he had the TV writing job, which made him a lot of money, 2 seasons of television in the 50s. And then he did his fellowship with Milton Babbitt while already working on Saturday Night and then West Side Story. So he didn't write cabaret stuff, but he did write this TV special with Burt Shevelove, this one piece for some variety show that was like a retrospective on the 50s. And it's just full of all of these references that no one would have even recognized by 1964. So he's definitely playing a little bit with that thing that he wrote. So if you want to see like the example of him doing it for real, just check out that song.
Oh, definitely.
In Look, I Made a Hat towards the back of the book. I have a wrap-up idea. Before we get to the wrap-up idea, a couple of us here have met Stephen Sondheim.
Oh,
yes,
shit.
correct.
And I don't know anyone who has an I Met Stephen Sondheim story that wasn't fucking hilarious. So AJ, why don't you do yours first, and then I'll talk about mine.
Okay, great. So I went to NYU. I went to Tisch. Yeah, no, actually that gets me hard. So there was a benefit they had at because I went to the Lee Strasberg Institute to learn how to method act for my first 2 years there. Oh God, just turgid. And I left there after 2 years because I was sick of watching other people cry. And then I went to Playwrights Horizons Theater School downtown, where I kind of thrived. I feel like that was sort of
one?
like,
I don't know if we boo that one.
It's fine. But they a couple years later, after I had graduated, they reached out to all these alumni and saying, hey, we're building up like a chorus, like an ensemble, so we can sing Sunday from Sunday in the Park with George for this benefit, this gala that Playwrights Horizons Uptown is having based on their Pulitzer Prize winners. So it was an evening of stuff like it was like Sunday was like the big closer, but they also did like a scene from Clybourne Park, but they didn't tell them where to cut it, so they just kept going, and it was like 35 minutes long. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's all one scene.
Falsettos? Did
I
that
think
show up in there?
Falsettos did a couple of numbers from there. Yeah. But they asked me this, and I'll be kind of frank with my singing abilities. I'm fine. Like, I'm not a great singer, but they also, I was never in a musical while I was at Playwrights. They just kind of asked me blind, and I was like, hey, I'm like kind of comfortable with singing, but I'm like not the best singer. And they're like, it's fine. It's the baritone part. Nobody fucking cares. So they brought me on, and I got to sing Sunday for Sondheim. Wow. Who was sitting in the front row. And as you were saying, Graham, it was sobbing the whole time. Like, seeing like students performing his work, like there was nothing that it seemed like that man loved more than watching students perform his work. Even when they weren't necessarily technically perfect, he was just so appreciative. And then I later learned he was also sobbing because he was like blackout drunk. So we went up to him after the show. It was me. There were three of us, and all I can remember is me and my friend Angela walked up to him after the show, and Angela was wearing this very big, very shiny brooch that was in the shape of a bird. It had little like diamonds in it. And we went up to Sondheim. And we were just like, oh, we're just so like, thank you so much for coming. Like, we're so like grateful to finally meet you. And his partner kind of intervened in between us and was like, Steve's not really feeling great right now. So like maybe you could. And Steve shoves him aside and says, no, I want to talk to him. And he turns and his eyes land on Angela's brooch. And Sondheim proceeds to stick his entire fist into his mouth as if he were trying to gasp, but missed, and instead inserted his entire fist into his mouth. He then pulled it out, the spit sort of attached to the hand as it was coming out, like a little bridge or whatever. And he looked at my friend Angela and said, "That's an incredible brooch." And Angela, without missing a beat, looks him in the eyes and says, "You're incredible." And that's how I knew she would make it in the business.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh,
and
my God.
yeah, that's my Sondheim story.
That is a fantastic story.
So
I retract my booze on NYU.
So a thing about Sondheim that everyone knows is that he loves puzzles, right? Mm-hmm. His movie is a puzzle. The play he wrote with George Firth is a puzzle. Leading up to writing The Last of Sheila with Anthony Perkins, he and Perkins did murder mystery parties that have all these devious puzzles. Sondheim really got into computer games in the 80s.
He loved Myst, right?
Yeah,
Oh, God,
and he was
loved
specifically a fan of Cliff Johnson. Cliff Johnson's games, which you can get for free on Cliff Johnson's website. Games like 3 for 3 or 3 in 3, something like that.
It's 3
and
in
when
3,
Sondheim
yeah.
briefly quit the theater after Merrily We Roll Along, he kind of wanted to go into making computer games.
God, I wish.
What a
Can you
world.
imagine?
He actually wrote a fan letter to Cliff Johnson after playing A Fool's Errand and told him how much of a fan he was of it and how inspiring it was to him. And Cliff Johnson was like, "Thanks. It's based partly on The Last of Sheila."
That's cool.
Wow.
I bet Sondheim cried when he got that letter.
Right?
Oh, I bet he did.
And
He stuck his whole fist in his mouth and just started sobbing.
another thing that Sondheim got really into was escape rooms. Sondheim went to every escape room in New York City.
And he probably solved them pretty quick, right? Like
I
he was.
bet. Well, some have very clever puzzles. The one I worked at did not. So this is leading into Sondheim came to my escape room. I worked on an immersive theater escape room. We were on the 14th floor of a building in K-Town. And you'd walk in and it was like a reception area, but then the reception area also turned out to be part of the room. We'd lock you in there. And it was a whole 5-room experience. There were holograms, there were actors, there were strobe lights, there were secret doors. Sondheim brought a whole group through, including like the former artistic director of like New York City Opera. I don't know who the other people were, but
Hal Prince, Bernadette Peters,
all the
Patti
big
LuPone.
Tinkin was there, but he curled up in a ball in the corner and sobbed his way.
Apparently
Said,
he
"No way out,
Reanimated
no way
corpse
out."
of Elaine Stritch.
Apparently he did drag Bernadette Peters to escape the room downtown. So
That's awesome.
There's no one who I could imagine would be worse at escape rooms than Mandy Patinkin, though. Given how, you see that video where his son like asks him to like name 5 vegetables he likes or something, and he's like can't do it. I forget what it is actually, but I cannot imagine someone like him doing well under the pressure of an escape room. Sorry, go on, Brian. I'm cutting you off.
So it was Sondheim with this whole group of people. And so the way it works is like each actor kind of had a room that we were that you would experience us in, to put it in the nicest terms possible for what people went through there. Mm-hmm. And in the first room, the reception room, people had to fill out these personality tests. So they were all of varying lengths. So then like some people had 3-page versions while others had 1. And the moment the first person finished with the 1 page, our receptionist would take that one and start taking others. And if anyone was still working on it, they'd get stared down. Sondheim took the longest because he had the 2-page version. And so he got stared down. He was like rapidly filling it out. That would come backstage and I would use material from that. Sometimes we'd look people up on social media and find out what their jobs were and bring that into part of the experience and our quote evaluation of them. And the whole idea of Paradiso is that you're walking in and you're getting evaluated. It's supposed to be an escape room that's run by this big corporate cult, like Scientology or Falun Gong or something. As they fill that out, then they have these clipboards that they fill them out. And on the back of the clipboards is where the first puzzle is. They have to arrange all of these different pieces. And then there's letters that correlate with certain pictures, et cetera, et cetera. They fucking sucked at this first puzzle. There's, we got to a point where we kind of knew if people were going to win or not. And if they get to like 23 minutes as opposed to 20 minutes on the first puzzle, like you just know they're not going to win at the end of the whole experience. Sure. And so the main thing I'm working on is I'm taking people's personality quizzes and I'm working on those. And I'm trying to find what's like a little Sondheim quote that I can just sort of put under there at the end. Like what's a thing that I can say to them that comes from
real
his
cool
lyrics.
Brian,
because it's going to be hilarious, and I wanted to see how he was going to respond to that. And there's a part where after they get through the receptionist puzzle, they get shoved into a closet. They have to find their way out through the closet, which has this like vent that you have to crawl through. It's not the size of a regular vent. It's something you can kind of hunch down and walk through, but we were kind of expecting that an 80-something-year-old man wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
So we made it really clear that like if he wasn't able to, just to like, they wave and then we'd pull people out and we'd put them in the next room, which would always be kind of fun. We'd have them just sitting at the desk while their friends finish the puzzle and come in. He went through it. They did very poorly on that puzzle.
Hell yeah.
Went
Iron
to the
Man
next
Sondheim.
room. They were suffering. So then Stephen Sondheim gets into the office room. He makes it out of that vent alive. We kind of just opened the door for them. We did that for a lot of groups because the scale didn't always work right.
The scale?
Scale. Yeah, it was a scale. It was like a kitchen scale. And when you turn it on, right, it starts at whatever weight is on it at 0. It was like bad puzzle design. So he gets into the office and he hears this, it's Frank Sinatra singing One for My Baby. And it's this clip and it goes, it's 2:45, and it glitches and it starts again. He says, it's 2:45. Sondheim immediately starts laughing because when Sondheim and Anthony Perkins did their murder mystery parties, all the stuff that kind of led into them writing The Last of Sheila, the most famous clue from those things was one of the party ended with everyone getting to a motel. Like, I don't know if it was in like New Jersey or like just out of the city somewhere.
Oh, so these were like scavenger hunty kind of games. Like they would actually go to different locations.
Yeah, they'd go to places, solve puzzles. There was a whole thing with like cake where people had to put pieces of cake together.
It's a lie.
And like one group like ate the whole cake and didn't get to finish the clue. Thank you, Josh.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for being a gamer.
There's a good 2007, 8
Jonathan
reference
Colton
there
lives
for
down
you.
the street from me, and he actually has appeared in my window and is screaming at me.
It's a nice song. So one of the parties, they'd have like limousines for people to travel around it. So one of the parties ends with them getting this motel. And in that motel, in the lobby, there is a record. And it's scratched. And it's a 45 of Sinatra singing One for My Baby. And it's scratched on the line.
It's 2:45. It's 2:45. It's 2:45.
This clue in Sondheim's murder mystery party led people, if they were thinking, to room 245, where the end of the party was. In our escape room, it led to a combination lock, which most people didn't get. They kind of had to, they followed another clue. And so it took, by the time they freed the actress from a closet, and yes, we did have a fucking actress just actually handcuffed in a closet without any safety measures.
Sounds like a bad time, Brian.
Sounds like a great time.
It is a bad time. It took an OSHA complaint to change that one. She would usually be like, oh, wait, what's that song you're hearing? But of course, Sondheim and his group comes in and he gets that. And they immediately get that clue out of the drawer and are already on their way. And that's when they start to do better. They've been playing very poorly and then they start to improve. And then one of the participants gets handed a prop gun that they're supposed to point at the vent that they came through as though they're being followed. So our actress handed it, who didn't know who Stephen Sondheim was, handed this gun to him.
Hell yeah.
So there's pictures that I have somewhere from our security camera footage of Stephen Sondheim holding this little dinky plastic handgun.
You gotta find those.
Everybody's got the right.
Yeah. And they get into the last room, which is hard, and I forget what version of the puzzle it was, but usually it stumped a lot of people at the very, very end in this last room where it's just them and a dead body that jump scares them because they have to reach into it and do like a Saw thing where they find a key in his intestines. The show goes to a lot of places. And then I'm like standing behind this glass door, like taunting them. And then they, as time was running out, they had like a minute left. I go outside. So there's this big door that opens into the trash hallway of this building. And I greet people and I let them know that they won, or I let them know that they lost. And then I'll say like, on question 4, Jason over here said that he thought he was very intelligent. Do you still feel that way now that you lost, Jason? Do you still feel intelligent? Things like that. People love getting made fun of. And so I was like ready to rip these guys apart. And
you're ready to just tear Stephen Sondheim a new asshole.
Ready. And then with 5 seconds left, they win.
Whoa.
I hear the little winning sound. The door pops open. I see green lights all around me. I'm like, holy fuck, how did they do that? And so they come out. I do my whole shtick as the weird, like David Miscavige type guy. And I said, you were doing very poorly at the beginning. And they all laughed because they knew. And I said, but you kept on growing instead of just kept on. And Stephen Sondheim responded with oh my God. I'm proud to say that they had a great time there, and that I was able, like Stephen Sondheim saw me perform, and I got to see him off, and I got to quote him at him and ruin his day.
But it's from your impression, unless I'm misunderstanding this, it sounds like you generated in Sondheim the frustrated growl that someone makes when it's like, oh, that's kind of good. Like, that's, you got me.
Yeah. Like, you got me just a little bit. It was
this knowing followed by a snarl.
Yeah, which is like, that is such a unique reaction to get out of someone. That is so great.
It was an absolute trip. And like 3 days later, as I was walking through Chelsea, like 2 blocks away from me, that dumpster that got bombed blew up.
Oh,
this
wow.
is 2016.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
And I was like, if that had gotten me, I would be okay.
Nice way to go.
like I met Sondheim 3 days ago.
I mean, Sondheim planted that bomb, so.
He was really mad about the kept on growing line.
I'll show him.
Called up Anthony Perkins and they...
I wouldn't be the first twink he obliterated.
Fuck.
So I wanted to kind of wrap this up with a little bit of a case study, just us pointing to a favorite thing of Sondheim's that has either been on our minds since his death or has just been on our mind in general. Just something that you wanted to focus on and why that particular thing means so much to you.
We all create stuff, obviously. Yeah. And I think the act of creation, of building something that is genuinely new, is I think it's the most important thing in the world. I really do. Yeah. I think that the process of creating art, shepherding it to completion, putting it up in front of an audience, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's out there. It's cliche, but the thing I keep thinking about is finishing the hat.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I think part of it is that right now, and I'll just get really personal. Absolutely. Because, Sondheim is, I think his work inspires deeply personal reactions in people because of the fact that he doesn't maintain any sort of ironic distance, like we were talking about before. Right now, my job, I'm not working in the field. I have a job that I do outside of this and outside of theater and performance and everything like that to make money. But working in the, I guess, corporate world so often feels completely alienating, which is by design. It's designed to alienate you from your labor, right? You don't have full ownership over anything. And I've been feeling so overwhelmed between that feeling of alienation, labor alienation in my own life, and seeing a lot of what is happening in the entertainment world right now, where similarly there is very little new, truly new, that is being created. In corporate America, merger and acquisition mania has made it so that intellectual property is the most valuable thing, as opposed to interesting ideas or, interesting people who could create new creative things that could potentially be the next Star Wars or the next Spider-Man or whatever. Instead, we'd rather do 10 million additional Star Wars movies. And when I think about Sondheim, and specifically when I think about Finishing the Hat, and how the art of making art and the pieces, all the little pieces that need to come together in order for something to be able to be truly special and truly magical, I fear immensely that is something that we are fundamentally losing. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that is hitting me right now about Sondheim's death. It's not that he's gone.
Yeah.
Because obviously he was an old guy and, he lived a great full life. We were talking about this. It's more about what he was able to create and how he was able to so uniquely express so many things in a way that shouldn't have worked but did. I don't know that we as a culture have the space for that anymore. And that makes me deeply, deeply sad.
Yeah.
So I think the thing I've been thinking about most since Sondheim died is just how eclectic he was, and how this is a guy who could write in truly one of the greatest musicals of all time about, a serial killing barber, and also like a very beautiful critique of just the American experiment in Assassins, and create something that, Assassins is kind of a miracle, when you really think about it. The fact that musical could actually say something like good and important is fascinating to me, and offer no real answers, but just be like, this is a real problem. Like, our country is divided between, the proprietor and the balladeer, and we live in this mess between those two extremes. And I worry that because Sondheim had producers who allowed him to experiment in the ways that he was allowed to, and that he was, allowed to fail and then come back. Fail, but come back and try again and make something new. I just don't feel like that's what the model is now, really. No, people aren't allowed to take these big swings or to do these incredibly different projects. And that's a real shame. We need more people who are willing to go out on those limbs to produce a guy like Sondheim, because I don't think, Sondheim had a lot of connections. Obviously, Oscar Hammerstein was his mentor, and he was able to get into the, theater that way. He did have those connections, but I just don't think a Sondheim starting out today would necessarily have the resources he would need to become the Sondheim that we know.
Yeah, even
that's
with
really
connections.
Tragic.
Even
with connections.
Look at Lin-Manuel Miranda's output. It's nowhere near what Sondheim was doing at the same, at a comparable time in his life.
Oh, absolutely. And everything obviously just gets workshopped to death, and it's just just do some crazy shit on stage. Yeah. Let's see the mess. Let's see Sunday in the Park with George.
It's the frustrating thing about reading more about the history of a medium from before you were born, which we all usually, I forget what the theory is, but that it's we're intensely nostalgic for a time 5 years before we ever existed or something like that. But learning that Sondheim is not only anomalous to today, but was so anomalous for most of his career, that even in a time where, compared to what we have now, there was a lot more artistic freedom. Even then, Broadway has always been limited by the fact that it's literally just one fucking street on the entire planet. And there there aren't the same kind of, this is a kind of a messy thought, but so bear with me for a second here, but there aren't the same kind of prerequisites that there were globally for something like the new Hollywood cinema to happen, where it's you have proofs of concepts happening in Europe that are inspiring artists, but also shaking up preconceptions about how would you budget something like this? How would you distribute something like this to prove that something that didn't seem like a commercial prospect could prove everybody wrong and say like, oh no, we tried something different in terms of how we share this with people. And we learned that there's actually a huge audience for that. And Broadway for the last, 60 years has kind of just been pursuing its founding principles straightforward and with very little. I mean, we've had obviously great artists working within Broadway, but I think it is, as much as I love Broadway, I love musicals, and I always have and I always will. But it does depress me to think of like he had to overcompensate in his art for not that he was compensating for anything, but he had to overcorrect. He had to be so talented. He had to be so there's not like, when you think of like
he had to be godly,
there's like, there's like your Chinatowns and stuff, and your great 70s movies. And there's also like your night moves or whatever. You're sort of like lesser, but still really good things from the same era. There's like this whole weird middle class of like highbrow musical that doesn't exist. There's only Sondheim and his acolytes and everything else. Like that's part of the reason why I think people are mourning him is it doesn't, we just haven't really built. It's very easy to say like, well, you never know who could be the next Sondheim. Maybe, and people thought, oh, is it going to be Jonathan Larson? Oh, is it going to be Lin-Manuel Miranda? And I think the sad fact of the matter is you would have to radically restructure a lot more about theater other than just what people find interesting or compelling on paper to make that happen.
Right.
Well, it's
like how you could never have another Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And in Shakespeare's day, you had plenty of writers who were also putting out 40 plays over the course of their life. Good tragedies.
And some of those plays are all right.
Some of those plays are all right. Some of those plays are garbage. Some of them are surprising. Like Marlowe's output is short just because he got murdered.
Right.
But his plays are fucking good.
They usually just put a damper on my output being murdered.
Yeah.
But
that's like the only, like he existed in a society where there was a business model that you could do where you could put out a whole bunch of plays.
Yeah.
Sondheim existed at a time, and you can see he also existed at a time where you couldn't.
Yeah.
But Sondheim existed at a time where you could put things out very, very fast, and keep going. And then the 90s come for everyone, including him. And so a single show like Roadshow isn't hampered so much by his hesitancy, although that's certainly part of it. Like most of the pieces for Roadshow are already there in 1993.
Yeah.
And it just takes 15 years for it not even to get to Broadway, just to get to another part of New York.
Yeah.
I think that maybe, and all of this ultimately comes back to the same issues that are impacting the world more broadly, obviously. Like as capital gets bigger and as it grows and as it scales and as it devours everything in its sight, it becomes less and less possible to take a bet on anything that is anything short of an absolute 100% sure bet. But
that's why we need to bring back patronage. We need to bring back the Meininger School of Production, like
Patreon.com/worstofall.
Patreon.com/worstofall.
But
worst possible .world.
To go back to the case study thing. It seems like this is the thing that's kind of on our minds is what is the future and what does it mean to not have hope? And I think the most interesting musical, and there is this video essay that I have like a
in the chamber
of it finished.
We'll get her done eventually.
About Merrily We Roll Along and what does it mean to produce Merrily We Roll Along at a time where hope is dead. But those specifically the song Our Time and specifically those opening notes of Our Time, those really simple chords, they're nice. They sound fine. They sound good. They sound like Sondheim. But again, when you know what they are in the context of the show, and when you have that image in your head of the three of them standing on that rooftop and seeing Sputnik for the very first time, and that idea that Frank says that edges are blurring, like the entire concept of what is possible he's writing about the past there, but it's even more in the past now. This idea that we could go anywhere and do anything, everything is possible and nothing makes sense, to borrow from a different show. Seeing Sputnik and looking at the sky, and you can hear the stars and you can see the image of the satellite flying across the sky in those few notes that lead into that song, and how that's written at a time where they're not feeling hopeful. And they don't want to be, it's ironic in a dramatic sense, but it's not ironic in that they think hope should be dead, because they really wanted to pass that on to the children who are performing and to the younger generation that they hoped would come and buy tickets, that maybe, even though Reagan is president now, there is a way forward. There is a way to avoid the disasters that didn't get avoided. That there still is
giving me chills just describing this.
Some sense that a better thing isn't just possible in like a vague logistical sense, but that a better thing is possible if you just have enough minds working towards it, which is a very limited idea, which is, again, something that didn't succeed, but still something that is so powerful if you can feel it, that it can keep you going for another day. And it can come in the form of seeing Sputnik fly across the sky, or hearing those little notes.
Something is stirring, shifting ground, it's just begun. Edges are blurring all around, and yesterday is done. Feel the flow, hear what's happening, we're what's happening. Don't you know, we're the movers and we're the shapers. We're the names in tomorrow's papers, up to us, man, to show 'em.
That's been something I've just hyper focused on since Friday, since learning that he had passed. So Graham.
Yeah, I mean, this has been such a great conversation about all these things. It's actually been incredibly good to, I feel like, vent a lot of these things that I had, that I couldn't really talk about with other people.
It's been kind of cathartic,
right? It's been a very cathartic experience. And I don't mean to say, when I was describing, like, I don't mean to sound too pessimistic. If I didn't think that there, like what you were saying, Brian, if I didn't think there wasn't literally no way forward, then I would have figured out something else to do with my life at some point. I think I am old enough now that, I would have course corrected at a certain point if I truly didn't think it was possible at all. And it feels very, very overwhelming. But there's something, and like Sunday, something that stood out to me from the book about Sunday that Lapine wrote is that it focuses a lot, and I know I'm bringing this up a lot, but it's just very fresh in my mind from having just finished it, that it focuses a lot on the producers' side of things. Like literally the people who are just the first line of defense against the kind of interests that we're talking about, and the people who are doubting these things, and in the early 80s, And there's this great story. One of the producers at Playwrights Horizons says, that and was furious that Sondheim was even coming off Broadway, because it's like, well, no. Sondheim is a commercial Broadway composer. He's like, if Playwrights Horizons is selling out to moneyed Broadway interests, then we're gonna pull out our funding. And this producer had to be like, listen, pull your fucking funding if you want to, at a certain point of having been harassed about this for a while. But like, this is a musical about a pointless painter. It's not even done yet. Like, you're fucking crazy if you think if we are selling out to Broadway interests. It's like the whole notion of, and then she was like, oh, all right, fine. Then go do it. It's fine. And it's, first of all, you
had me at pointillist.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, first of all, it makes me weirdly nostalgic for a time when, as we were saying, people would come to the defense of an idea like that and put their own careers on the line and ultimately be vindicated.
I know selling out is just such an obsolete concept
so
at this
obsolete
point.
at this point. I mean,
but like in the 80s, that's all everyone was thinking about.
Yeah, I know. It's just crazy to think about.
It's a huge part of Rent even. And that was
totally
90s,
like,
80s and 90s.
It's insane to think about like off-Broadway pandering to commercial Broadway interest being a concern at that time, when it's like,
when the public did Hamilton.
Wait just a couple decades. Don't worry. Like, if you're nervous,
it's literally all it is.
Literally all it is.
They open that Pandora's box, and that's it, right?
Exactly.
Like,
I mean,
the only reason the public
So
survived was because of a chorus line's money, right?
Right.
So it's just like it's
Michael
been
Bennett,
happening
but,
for a very long time.
So that it obviously that makes me incredibly nostalgic and sad and pessimistic and very, very frustrated. But I obviously see. I think if we're talking about like who's the next Sondheim. People have the big names that they throw out for that, but I think also if you look at like composers like Michael R. Jackson or the late great Michael Friedman, you know, like people, there's certainly, it's not like that the talent isn't there. And if you hold up, you know, Sondheim on the level of like, if he is the Shakespeare of this era of human history, and then you could make the case that he is, like anyone shooting and falling even short of that is still going to be some of the most important and exciting artists of our day. And those people do exist, and they have so far figured out ways, and radically different ways, to put on what they want to put on, even if they've done so in the face of a lot of resistance from the culture at large. And the thing that the line that's been, the song that I've been listening to a lot, that it didn't used to be one of my favorites from Sunday, but it just keeps making me very weepy. And so I've been returning to it as sort of a cathartic thing, which is Children in Art. And the line, the child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us? Which is a perfect little line, but also speaks to, I think, the commonality between Sondheim and those guys I just described, and then lots of other artists, is that they are just... They have opened themselves up to powers of observation that ring true for so many people, just by literally allowing themselves to observe with unusual specificity the things around us, and heighten and distort and change them in whatever way that is part of their expression in that, for that show or that song or whatever, that play, that movie, you know. But that is the thing that if we zoom, we can zoom so far out and worry about the macro problems, and we should, because they are big problems that need to be that need to be solved and feel unsolvable. But there is, I think, like, I am given so much hope and excitement by someone who can capture how sweet the child is and notice how rapturous the girls are, and just like figure out a way to create those little dots that like create something bigger. And that's still happening. You know, that legacy of Sondheim's is nowhere near dead, and will never be.
I think the incredible legacy of Sondheim is not just that he has made things that are great. He's always been hyper focused on the idea of getting people in and getting people to make something new and to move on beyond what he did. And no pun intended. But, you know, as a teacher, as someone who offered grants, as a mentor to people like Jonathan Larson, and not only that, but just his body of work itself is so inspiring to an artist and to someone who is not familiar with the form, that he has played a major role in getting all of us involved in this field in some way or another. I've never written a song in my life. I never will. I'm pretty much just an actor, and I would not even be anywhere near any of this if it hadn't been for Stephen Sondheim. So if you ever log into Shudder and see my dick and balls, you have Stephen Sondheim to thank for that.
I think that generosity is a thing that will also naturally propagate, right? Like this isn't over yet. His legacy isn't over yet. Obviously, we have his body of work, but also all of the people who he inspired. I think that when it comes to art and creating art, the mere concept of generosity is such a radical act. It always has been, and that is the case now more than ever. I think that the artists who he inspired through his body of work and through his generosity, that those same artists will take what they create and take the fruits of those creations and continue to pay it forward for future generations as well. So that's the other piece that I think does give me at least a little bit of optimism as we, you know, face the overheating death of the planet over the course of the next century.
Also my dick and balls on show.
Yes.
Well, that too.
So Graham, speaking of exposing yourself, do you have anything that you would like to plug this evening?
Your dick and balls, maybe?
The next closest thing, which is my Twitter account, would be the place to keep up to date with anything going on.
The comings and goings.
All the comings and goings. And watch Tuning Out the News on Paramount Plus. See if you can borrow someone's account.
I have an account. You can
to all of our listeners. You can borrow from Josh and
share our
AJ.
credentials.
To be fair, it's not my account. I did steal it from somebody else's, but I will give that password.
That'll be our level 4 Patreon tier.
I was gonna say I'll post my Paramount Plus credentials in Patreon for anybody to use.
It's like I love the show and I want to tell other people to watch it, but it's always interesting when like trying to recommend something that you're in, involves probably asking the person to sign up for like a new fucking thing. Like it's probably not something they already have. So I'm glad to hear that you guys already have it. And yeah.
And what's your ad on Twitter, Graham?
Oh, my ad is really annoying. It's at GR8H8M_T3CHL3R. So that's 8s instead of A's.
I hate that.
We'll have it written out in our show notes.
Yeah, but
we'll have
if
it
you
written
probably
down
just
there.
search my normal name, that should do the trick.
Yeah. Yes. Cool. Yeah. It should pop up. Also, I think you can see Graham's first episode of Tuning Out the News on YouTube.
Yes, that
where
one.
you interview Salman Rushdie.
Salman Rushdie. That's on YouTube, and basically its entirety for free.
I think I'd kind of like to close this out with talking a little bit about "Someone in a Tree," which was Sondheim's self-confessed favorite song.
Yeah.
It is also, I think, my favorite song of his, and has informed, I think, most of my aesthetic as an artist at all. Was first hearing that song and just trying to come at history or come at art really from just a variety of different ways and trying to figure out that great truth. And I think if there's one thing that Sondheim taught us all is that it is the effort of trying to find your way to that truth that is the ultimate goal, I think, of any artist. And I'm so excited to see the next generations try and figure out what the hell was happening in that treaty house. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I am the worst of all possible Brians.
I saw everything, where they came and where they went. I was part of the event. I was someone in the tree. I was younger then.
Tell him what I see.
All right, folks, this was a hard one, but I'm very glad that we got to do it. And I'm very glad that we got to do it with Graham. He's a real good boy. You should read his stuff. Very funny guy. As always, I would like to thank our patrons at Patreon. This includes Aeneas Hemphill, Andrew Kilroy, Ari Rodriguez, Ben Ferber, Benjamin R. Alfred, Bill Corby, Dave Scholar, Davis Vandestieg, Dominic Russo, Earl Reynolds, Ian, JV, Nate Netzley, Nell Johnson, Octavia Immersive, Olivia Hernandez, Scott M., Tony Diddy, Trevor Strunk, with a very special thank you to Ashley Stoneman, Dara Swisher, Hannah White, Nikola Donov, Sam Borman, and Timmy Sexton. As always, you make this more and more possible with every day. Rest in peace, Mr. Sondheim.
Giant sweeping floor. And she gives you food and she gives you rest. And she draws you close to her giant breast. And you know things now that you never knew before. Not till